Welcome to today's Toolkit, March Wins, Ownership Report and Radio Online Public File Deadlines Loom, presented by Lawrence Miller and Melodie Virtue. Larry is an attorney in the Washington, D.C. office of Garvey, Schubert, a full-service law firm with a national public broadcasting practice. He advises public radio and television clients in areas such as FCC licensing, policy and regulatory compliance, program production and distribution, copyright, trademark protection, the educational broadband service, and station transactions. Melodie Virtue has been practicing communications law for over 30 years. She is an owner at the Washington, D.C. office of the law firm Garvey, Schubert. Her primary focus is on assisting broadcasters in their dealings with the FCC, providing regulatory advice, working on transactions and applications for stations, and advising them on website compliance, copyright, and streaming issues. Before we get started, we have just a few housekeeping items. All participants are automatically muted for the duration of this toolkit. If you have any questions for our presenters, please submit them using the chat box. Our speakers will answer questions at the end. After the session, PMBA will send all participants an evaluation and link to PowerPoint slides. The session will be recorded and available on the PMBA website for members. In order to obtain CPE credit for this session, participants must remain online and participate for the full toolkit. There will be polling questions throughout the toolkit. To obtain CPE credit, you must answer all questions. CPE credits may be denied if the participant does not answer all polling questions and remain for the entire duration of the toolkit. Upon completion of the toolkit, you must complete the post-toolkit email evaluation. For those that qualify, PMBA will send you your CPE certification within 2 weeks. CPE questions should be directed to info@pmbaonline.org. And now I'd like to turn it over to Larry and Melodie.
Thanks very much. Larry Miller here. Welcome to March Wins at the FCC. And we'll cover ownership reporting. There's a report deadline coming up. Radio public inspection file. There's a deadline coming up. We'll talk generally about public inspection files. So anyone only on the TV side, listen into that as well. And along the way, we're going to mention what the FCC's done to the main studio rule. We will take questions at the end, but if there's confusion along the way and you send word to us that you just don't understand something, we'll do our best to address that as we go along. So now on to the action. Slide for Melodie.
Hello, everyone. Next slide, please. So ownership reporting is the same as you're used to doing, but with twists. The FCC changed the rules so that non-commercial stations now file at the same time that commercial stations do. You no longer file on the anniversary of your renewal deadline. Instead, you will be filing every 2 years by December 1 of odd years. And all the information must be accurate as of October 1st, which is the snapshot date. And then you file every 2 years thereafter. But the FCC wasn't ready with the software for the new form in time to have everyone file by December 1 last year. So now they've extended the deadline to March 2, which is a month and a half away. And I wanted to just remind everyone, because this question has come up, that the next one, after the one you're going to file between now and March 2nd of this year, the next biennial will be due on December 1 of 2019. And again, the information must be accurate as of October 1 of 2019 at that time. So this question comes up a lot because people say, oh, my board has changed. Do I put the old board members down? The answer is yes. Whoever was on your board or whoever was an officer on the snapshot date, October 1, must be listed in the biennial ownership report. Also new to the form that you're not used to doing, that the commercial folks have to do, but now you also have to do, is you have to include the race, nationality, and the gender of all interest holders, and that's all your officers and directors. So that's also new. In addition, the same type of information, like by whom your board members were appointed or elected, or their profession and occupation, principal profession or occupation, will be on the form as before. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So the big thing is, who are your attributable interest holders? And that means that you would list all your governing board members, all your trustees if you're a university, any board member, plus your board member officers, so your chairman, vice chair. And then there's kind of a debate in the non-commercial world about what officers do you list, particularly if you're in an institutional licensee. We don't really have a lot of guidance from the FCC on that, but we seem to have come to an internal agreement among some of the law firms that represent a lot of public stations, which is to include the officers that have direct oversight over the station, even if they're not necessarily officers of the board. That way, if you need to have someone sign, you will have had someone listed on your ownership report that has that ability, that's an officer. So we kind of draw the line there. If you are going to claim an exemption for an officer or a director, you need to have a statement that you would include for why you're claiming that exemption. This doesn't really come up all that much in the non-commercial world, but it might come up if you have a lot of officers and you just cannot, it doesn't make sense to provide all that information. We can talk about that if someone has a question about that, but the FCC has not really given us guidance as to what that exemption statement would, how that would need to be addressed or described. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the puzzler. And if you want your CPE credit, you should be answering this question. And once the polling has ended, we'll continue with Larry on the slide that follows.
Well, a little historical background. A few years ago, the FCC, under its last administration, proposed to treat public broadcasters exactly the same as commercial broadcasters with respect to reporting ownership. There was generally opposition to that in the public broadcast industry. The global opposition was, don't treat us like them because ownership's different for public broadcasters and for commercial broadcasters. There's no pecuniary interest in stations. Boards very often are established based on representation of certain segments of the community. Sometimes officers serve ex officio because of virtue of who they are in the licensee at a university or in the community. The head of the Board of Education always serves. Or people are just serving in the public interest and representing others, not really representing themselves. So their race and ethnicity doesn't particularly matter the way it does under the analysis from the FCC for commercial broadcasting. Then there was a secondary battle, which was, if in fact you are going to be collecting information on every public broadcasting attributable interest holder, how are you going to keep track of them? Because the idea of the whole system here is the FCC is going to track over time trends in broadcast ownership, and in particular trends with respect to minority and ownership and women's ownership. We lost the big debate the Commission decided it's going to track public broadcast interest holders the same as commercial broadcast interest holders. We won the skirmish for what it's worth. The skirmish was over what information has to be provided in order to get a unique identifying number so that the Commission can track owners across the country. The first proposal was to require either full Social Security numbers or the last 4 digits of Social Security numbers plus additional information. The public broadcasting industry concern was, number one, even partial Social Security numbers can, in many cases, be reverse engineered to get a full number. And secondly, it was a concern that some people, such as members of state authority boards, members of other boards where there are officials serving who have relatively little to do with the station on a day-to-day basis, were going to be not too interested in providing information and getting a number. On that one, public broadcasting won the skirmish, and it's possible now to get a special use FCC registration number, SUFRIN or SUFRIN, without providing Social Security number information. That number can be generated just by pushing a button on the ownership reporting form and getting a unique number. The one caveat there is that it's one number per person. So if you have a person on your board with an attributable commercial broadcast interest, you need to find out, they're already going to have a FCC registration number, an FRN. You should find out what that is. If you have someone on your board who has other attributable interests in a non-commercial station, and it's not all that uncommon for someone to serve on the board of, say, a university station and also perhaps another college station or a local community group station. If someone has 2 interests, you're going to be reporting the second interest anyway, and if they've already gotten an FRN, you need to use that FRN. If they haven't gotten an FRN, you can use the SUFRIN system to get them one, and then they have to make sure they tell the other station in which they have an interest to use that same number. Next slide for Melodie.
And just so you know, the idea behind it is that there's one number per person, one number per entity, so that the way the form is supposed to work now is if you have that number, you can find out all their interests because they'll all be interrelated in the FCC's database for ownership. We'll see if it works, but that's the idea. So just let's get to some of the mechanics. You're going to start your form by going to this new filing system. Many of you may be familiar with CDBS, which is the Consolidated Online Database System, which has historically housed the FCC filings that are required by the Media Bureau and by broadcasters. If you are a television licensee, you will know that the FCC has already migrated many of the technical filings into Licensing and Management System, LMS. That's the new filing system. The FCC has launched this new form for the ownership reports in LMS. None of the old information that was in your old CDBS ownership reports will be ported over into this system. Instead, you will need to rekey the information, although if an individual had an FRN, like Larry was describing, it will actually auto-populate that name in the LMS subform for that attributable owner. So where you want to go to log in is at this link that's showing on the screen. You will log in with the licensee's FRN and password. So every entity must have its own FRN. And you can treat, what's different about this is that it's not only your FRN and password in LMS, it's your login information for LMS. Just like, well, not like CDBS. CDBS had a separate login number and password, and then you needed also to have the FRN and password to file an application out of CDBS. Now it's a combined process. You use the FRN and password to log into LMS, You don't need a separate number to log in. It actually acts like your login information. When you go to LMS and you enter your FRN and password in the login section, which is on the landing page for LMS with that link, you will come to a screen that says, you'll see this button that says File and Application. And you will pull it down and you will select Ownership Report, Non-Commercial Broadcast Station Biennial Ownership Report. The other ownership reports relate to non-biennial, which would need to be filed if you had a sale of a station or a brand new full power station. And there's also the commercial ownership report selections there too. So you would select the non-commercial biennial report in that pull-down menu. Next slide, please. So there's this problem with the new form that just drives everybody crazy because they think they cannot proceed. You will see this warning message in a yellow block that says your FRN is not associated with any station or application in our database. And you're like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. I can't do anything. And I got to associate my FRNs with my call signs. And no, don't worry about it. Ignore that yellow block. For purposes of ownership reports, just don't even think about it. Just leave it alone, ignore it. I don't know if the FCC will at some point fix that, but for now, do not let that be a roadblock for you, although it looks like a roadblock. And then it's pretty easy to actually complete the form. You will work your way through it. You will be able to save as you go along. You can navigate through it. There will be a navigation pane on the right side that tells you what sections are completed with a check mark and ones that you still need information. And that will be on the right side of the screen. And you can go back and forth, and it doesn't have to be linear. You can just fill it as you get the information. If you have a multi-tier structure, like if your licensee entity is owned by a parent, you will also need to do a parent report, and you will need to describe the like an org chart for who owns what. You can do it easily if it's ABC College owns DEF licensee. You can do that in a narrative form, but you'll need an exhibit, or you can do it as a chart that shows the ABC with a block with a line down to DEF. And if it's more complicated, you will want to do it like an organization chart. As I mentioned before, the FRN and password acts like an account login. You can actually use the same account you've logged into for the licensee using the same FRN for your licensee to create a brand new form that relates to one of the attributable owners if an entity has an ownership interest in the licensee. So that's also a more convenient feature. And then let's go to our next slide. We have another puzzler for polling for people who need to get CPE credit. So I don't know if at the end of this quick poll anyone actually tells you what the answer is, but I will maybe wait a moment and then hand the reins over to Larry and let him tell you the answer. And the polling has been completed. Okay, so next slide.
Okay, well, those who said October 1st, 2017 are in great shape. We're ready to move on to the online public file. I think at this point, are there any, do we have any questions there that look like they should be answered immediately before we leave the ownership report topic? Or do we have any questions at all, I guess is
There
better.
are questions. There's about 7.
Okay,
First one.
Yeah, we can quickly do it. We have about another 4 or 5 minutes we can spend on this topic before we move on. So if you have some questions there that look like they're of general applicability, that's great. We should have said at the beginning, we're not offering specific legal advice here. For that, you go to your attorney, whether it's us or others. But if there's questions of general applicability, we'd be happy to address them now.
So with December 1, 2019 being a Sunday, does the filing go to December 2nd or the Friday before?
Goes to the next business day.
Okay, when filing ownership report for a network, can you file one for parent or one for each station?
What you can do is you can include one parent report for all of the different network licensees. That's a change from the old way of doing it, where you had to redo a parent report for each licensee cluster or entity. So now you can do a consolidated one parent report.
What is the best approach to collect race, nationality, and gender info?
Well,
good question. I think the best approach is to distribute a questionnaire to same questionnaire to everybody without making assumptions, and ask them to fill it out. Let people self-categorize themselves. We found in the past one convenient way to do that is if you happen to have an in-person board meeting that is at about the right time to collect the information as of October 1st. Having people do it in person and not letting them out of the room till they fill it out works pretty well. And then those who are absent, you try and hit by email with a follow-up call. But at any rate, that's the job, is to get that information. And there's other information that you may want to collect at the same time that's useful in other types of reports.
Okay, and last question. Does every attributable interest holder need an FRN or an SU FRN?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the thing to really emphasize on the non-commercial folks got a special pass so that they can use only the SU FRN, the special use FRN, is that if they do, and Larry mentioned this already, if they are using that number from the last time biennial reports are filed, you need to make sure you use that same number again.
Yeah, there was a temporary system when the last biennial reports were filed that permitted you to avoid generating a number. So some attributable interest holders who were attributable interest holders at the time of the last biennial report don't have a number yet. Others have a number, and if so, yep, that's it. They have to continue to use the same number. That's the whole concept here.
We did have one more question. Is an officer a staff officer or an officer of the board?
This is where
well, as
the
Melodie
officer
said,
of the board,
Yeah, that's our interpretation. Check with if you have other lawyers, check with them. Our interpretation of a somewhat vague direction is that they're looking for officers of the board. And so you may, for example, have a university licensee that has literally 30, 40, or 50 university staff officers. We don't think they're looking for all that, although we would list any staff officers who are in the direct line of control of the station, and especially those who are going to be signing off on applications and reports. On the other hand, if you have members of the governing board, it would be a very, very unusual situation where you could not list them, even if that governing board may only look at your station activities once every 5 years, they're in control. And from an FCC point of view, they are the controlling interest holders in the owner of the station. So all of the board members and the officers among them should be listed. And with that, we can move on to the new requirement for the radio public inspection file, which is moving online with a deadline of March 1st of 2018. Yep, the day before the ownership report deadline. And much of what we're going to cover here applies to television as well. Those of you who are joint licensees are going to recognize an awful lot of this. Those of you who are radio, this may be new for you, and the TV, it's a good refresher. You can transition and should transition at least somewhat before that deadline. If you wait till the last minute, you're facing potential crisis. But once you transition and hit the button where you load the reports that says you're going live, you're there. We have one client who inadvertently hit the button last week and went live, even though only a few documents had been loaded on the report. We're still working at trying to get that reversed and hopeful we can do it, but it's not easy and perhaps won't happen. So once you do transition, by you can't go home again, we mean that you've gone live with it. You can't revert to just your hard copy. Until you transition, you should keep your paper public files, or if you've computerized your public files, which you're permitted to do, the computer access at your station available for the public. Once you have converted all of your files, save for the political file, all of your files should be online. At that point, you can recycle perhaps a couple of drawers of old public files. The special case is the political file. You don't have to load any old political file materials, and many public stations, I think most, don't have any political file or anything in their political file. But you only have to post online political file materials going forward, not those from earlier in the term. Otherwise, you are transitioning to an online public file that will contain all the required documents that are still within the retention period from this entire current license term. So you need to plan ahead here for a couple reasons. Number one, obviously, you have a deadline, and these are things that take time. Number two, this is the time to review where you stand on the licensee generated materials. We're going to discuss in a few moments the materials that the FCC will load for you and the materials that you need to load. But among the materials you need to load are your issues programs list, done quarterly during the license term, your donor lists, which should be done on an ongoing basis during the license term, and your annual EEO public file reports. On the off chance that you are missing one or more reports for any quarters, you'll need to deal with that issue now. That's something to figure out internally and discuss with your legal counsel as to how to handle it, and we'll show you in a bit the way in which the commission would pick up on missing documents and what the penalties can be for failing to have documents online. So it's a good time. I would say first order of business is see, do you have in your paper public file or local computerized public file all the documents that should be there at this time? And next slide for Melodie.
The FCC did acknowledge, based on comments that were provided in the rulemaking proceeding about this, that it is possible that there are still some stations that do not have reliable internet, and that they could request a waiver of going online to the public file because of an undue burden. And they're really thinking more about an economic hardship or rural stations that don't have internet connection. So you can apply for a waiver. It's only good for 2 years. You'd have to renew it after 2 years. I would only go to this if you really cannot access the internet to do an online public file. I don't think the FCC is likely to waive the requirement any other way. It also calls up the question, and Larry hinted at this at the beginning about the main studio. Some of you may realize that the FCC repealed the main studio requirement, and it was effective January 8th. If you have not gone online with your public file, you still need to keep a public file locally in your community of license, and that would be a hard copy that you would need to keep even if you have no main studio. So this is only for people who really cannot access the internet. Next slide. So here's how you log on. You go to this URL for publicfiles.fcc.gov/admin, and you'll see a page that has a box. It's a little confusing initially because it'll say a category, and then it'll say a field for your facility ID and passcode, and you don't know what your passcode is. But below that is a link for the owner dashboard. If you have not generated passcodes before, you need to go to that link first for the owner dashboard. There you log in with your FRN and password. And that will give you all of the stations that are associated with your FRN and password. It may be some are missing. In that case, you need to contact the FCC staff. We've had this problem with some stations earlier in the process. Hopefully that's been cleaned up. This is why you do not want to wait till the last minute to find this out. Once you go to that page, it will show you all the call signs that are available, and it will have a passcode, which the FCC will generate. And the idea was that you might have a staff member that handles your public file, and you don't want that staff person to have your FRN and password. So all they would need to manage and upload documents to the online public file would be the passcode and the station's facility ID number. And they couldn't go off and file other things because they don't have access to your FRN and password. So first you need to get your access codes. There's also a provision for third parties. The FCC realized that maybe some new business would come along and manage your public files for you, and those have access tokens. I can say I do not yet know how those work because no one has asked that they be used, but right now you want to generate your passcode, and then you go back to that page again at publicfiles.fcc.gov/admin, and you log in with the station's facility ID number and the passcode that you've gotten from the prior page. Then it's pretty easy, and when you land on it, you will see, and we don't have the login screens, but you'll see that there's this FCC's masthead, and then a lighter shade of blue that are actually tabs. And this is where most people get hung up the first time they go into the online public file, is they don't realize that those are tabs, and you'd have to hover over them, and you can see that there are all these folders and categories the FCC has created for you, where you can put in documents you need to upload, and it's well organized, and they've done this for you. The FCC staff and the designers of the software have done this for you. And it does make it a lot easier, and usually the biggest stumbling block is finding those, realizing that that blue bar under the masthead is actually a series of tabs, and that you need to hover over that tab to get all the different boxes you can drop things into. Now, Dropbox and other types of software products like Dropbox can be used to migrate your files that you have on your hard drive over to the Dropbox, and then they can be just click and dragged over to the FCC online public file. And you can also populate multiple stations that way. If you have the same, like if you have an annual EEO public file report that applies to 10 stations, you can just drop it into each of those stations' public files online. So you'll find, or at least what clients are telling us that have migrated, they find that the online public file is really a lot easier to manage than the old-fashioned paper file. So let's go to the next page. The next slide. So the FCC wants the public file to be searchable. So they want you to use the native format of the document. So if you do your issues, programs, lists in Excel, you don't have to convert it to PDF. You can if you want, but you can just slide, load it as an Excel file. If you do convert it to PDF, make sure it's not scanned to PDF, but it's just saved as PDF so that the PDF is still searchable. Another requirement is that you must have a link on your home page that goes directly to the landing page of the public-facing online public file for the station. You also need to have a contact info for someone at the station that can assist someone with disabilities in accessing your public file online. And I had already mentioned the idea that there could be third-party hosting, and that's so that if someone who wants to create a business doing this for stations, that it can also upload those materials for you. Then I guess we'll get into the actual documentation. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll hand it over to Larry.
The FCC is going to upload the filings that you do electronically, and it's on you to upload filings that you would normally have had in your paper public file. Let's hit them one by one. So the FCC imports from the electronic filing systems. Currently for radio, that's CDBS. For television, that is generally LMS with a couple of exceptions. The Commission has announced that it's going to turn everything over to LMS to have one system. There are a couple of advantages, and in my view, a couple of decided disadvantages in LMS. Regardless of them, that is where things are headed. So for now, for radio, the FCC will import from the CDBS system information, the forms that you've e-filed. So applications, except for those few non-commercial AM licensees, except for their license applications, all applications, facility applications, and the applications stay in the public file until they're granted and the grant becomes final. When the Commission staff grants an application, it's considered an initial grant. Then with the passage of time and no adverse developments, petitions for reconsideration or applications to the full Commission, to the commissioners for review, the grant becomes final. Once it becomes final, you can pull the application out. Initially, you will see as you set up your public file, the Commission is importing everything from the beginning of time, or at least from the beginning of the CDBS system, going back 28 years or so. So there's an initial cleanup to be done. Get to that in a moment. So applications are automatically imported by the FCC. Ownership reports are automatically imported by the FCC. The retention rule there is only the most recent ownership report that you filed needs to be in the online public file. The Commission has instructed licensees to clean outdated materials out of the public file. My thought is it suits your purposes anyway. This is a no volunteer situation. There's no reason to have documents in the public file that aren't required to be there. So when you first look at your public file as populated by the FCC, you'll see ownership reports going back for decades. You can take out all but the most recent. Then when you file your next one by the March 2nd deadline, you can delete the previous one. One at a time for ownership reports should show. The renewal form, 396, equal employment opportunity, and the midterm report, so it's an 8-year renewal term, and the midterm report is filed for standalone licensees 4 years in, for joint radio TV licensees 4 years into the television term. Those terms are generally staggered by 1 year. Those forms are automatically imported by the FCC, and they stay in for the current license term. And then when your license renewal application is granted and the grant becomes final, you can remove those. The Public and Broadcasting Procedure Manual is a document hasn't been updated for several years, but the FCC publishes that. That provides information for the public on how to participate in licensing processes. That stays in forever, and the FCC takes care of the upload. On the next slide, we have the note to remove filings that are beyond the retention period. So you'll do that at the outset and then regularly along the way. So for ownership reports, you file a new one, take out the last one. For renewal related filings, your renewal application, talk about the renewal record of renewal public announcements. Those things come out after the renewal has become final. So you want to look at the outset. You'll have a massive amount of cleaning out to do on the radio side. And also for those of you on, and we've seen people who have already gone to the online public file and radio who haven't done that clean out. And I will tell you that there are television stations that are way, way, way behind on the clean out. So at the outset, you want to do that regularly along the way. Take a look as you put something in that where it's one at a time. Take out the old one. And then upon finality of your license renewal grant, you'll have a batch of things you can take out. Exception right below that, if you have made a waiver showing in an application and the waiver was granted, so long as that waiver is in effect, you're to keep that application in the public file. There's precious few such applications. Most of them had been applications for permission to keep your main studio somewhere other than where the old rule specified, so that licensees of networked stations with a flagship and a bunch of satellite stations that repeated it had to request a waiver so that those satellite stations could use the flagship's main studio. If you had such a waiver showing in, now that the main studio rule is gone, you can take those applications out of the public file. That's a moot issue now. When
Larry,
you take documents,
let me interrupt you for a moment.
Yes.
And check in with the organizer, because I'm getting an alert that the connection to GoToWebinar server has been lost.
Okay.
The teams have disappeared. Can we check in with the organizer? Can they hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, so I guess we can continue.
Right. I'm going to assume that the dropout was momentary. People can let us know if they're missing something here, but where we are is on the page that starts remove filings beyond retention period. And at the bottom of that slide, the point is that when you want to remove an FCC loaded document from public view, you slide over a little marker and it grays out that document. It's still available to you, and the commission can see it as well, but not to the public. Documents that you loaded rather than the FCC can be dragged into the trash can icon and deleted that way. The next slide moves us from FCC uploads to station uploads. And the prime ones are the your annual EEO local public file report will be uploaded to the online public file. It's currently the current requirement for television stations and for radio stations that have already gone online with the public file is that you need to both upload the report to the public file and post it on the station website. Under the new rule, you're permitted to, instead of posting it on the station website, you could put a link on the station website to the online report in your public file. The quarterly issues programs lists you need to upload. That's the same requirement you have now to put them in your paper or local computerized public file by the 10th day after the end of each calendar quarter. Those reports stay in the public file for the license term. So at the end of an 8-year license term, you're going to have 32 quarterly issues programs reports, and you're going to have 8 annual EEO public file reports.
Larry, let me interrupt one more time because we need to advance the slide. And I think you can continue.
Yeah, we do need an advance on the next slide. I'll continue until we have that. Are we still connected to headquarters there?
I don't know.
Yes, which slide are you talking about?
We need to go to the next slide. That we moved from station from FCC uploads to the one that says station uploads. The next slide. And as you work on that, I'll say that the under the new rule, you can have a link to the EO public file report in your online public file. For the quarterly issues programs lists, those will continue to go in the public file, which is now online, and both of those categories of lists, by the end of the license term, the 8 EEO reports and the 32 quarterly issues programs lists can be removed after your license renewal application is granted and that grant has become final. There's also a requirement at renewal time that you make announcements before and after you file your license renewal application. Information concerning those announcements, the text and the broadcast schedule, has to be posted, and that can be removed as well once your license renewal is granted and becomes final. Next station upload on the next slide actually is contracts, and the FCC has a funny definition of contracts. The most common quote contract, close quote, that a public broadcast licensee would file is its formation documents. So for a 501c3 corporation, you would file copies of your articles of incorporation and bylaws, your current articles and bylaws, or a certificate of formation if that's what's done in your state. However, there's no requirement that public bodies post their statutes or other organizational documents. This is really designed for entities that are created for the purpose of operating a station. So we need at this point to jump 2 slides, if possible. And I'll describe what would be there if we could jump them, which is the final station upload slide just before the next puzzler. And the additional documents that the station is responsible for uploading are time brokerage agreements, which in the public sphere are generally referred to as public service operating agreements, or PSOAs, where one entity is operating operating the licensee station, a copy of the agreement providing the terms of that operation should be uploaded. Next is FCC investigations and complaints of which you have been notified by the FCC. Information on those has to be posted and stays posted until the FCC tells you you can remove them. That category includes EEO audit letters. 5% of call signs are audited each year by the FCC for EEO compliance, where they ask for copies of your annual most recent two most recent annual EEO public file reports and backup information, the documentation that shows you've done what should have been done with respect to filling openings and meeting the requirement for outreach initiatives. So if you're audited, the FCC's audit letter, your full response, and the FCC's letter either clearing you or stating that there's issues all have to be in the public file, and you have to upload them there. The FCC hasn't, I don't think they generally say at any point you can delete those, but they appear to be license term documents. And finally, donor lists. Probably the most overlooked public file requirement is that you maintain a list of people, entities, organizations that have underwritten production of programming. There's lots of different interpretations of what that means. At the very core, certainly, any underwriters of programming on your own station. This is not general supporters. This is those who have actually provided money to produce programming should be listed. The commission pretty clearly has said that you also should be listing the donors for the production of programming provided to you by others. So by various radio networks or syndicators, or television networks or syndicators, although the commission's has had a confusing jumble of decisions over the years where they call into doubt exactly what they mean. This is one to consult with your attorney. I'm going to show you in a moment what I consider to be the gold standard is. The main thing is to have a donor list, have donor lists in your public file and to update them regularly. And one long ago decision involving a public radio station, the commission said every quarter is not enough. It should be an ongoing list. They didn't say how frequently is enough, but they said every quarter is not. Whether there's institutional memory at the commission of that decision or not, I do not know. And that brings us to the next puzzler.
Can I check in with the organizer to make sure that they can still hear us?
Still here.
Okay, I'm not seeing the slides change at our end. So let us know when we should go live again. I don't know if the people realize we can actually see their computers during the puzzlers. I see two people playing solitaire, one on eHarmony, three Midwesterners looking at Tahitian vacations.
You're back.
We're back? Okay. This is just a real quick review of what the public sees when they sign in. I put a couple slides together here. So the next slide, which is pick these three at random. It's the public view of stations that have gone live. First is WNPR, one of the Connecticut public broadcasting stations. And you'll see what the public sees when they sign in. The lineup of icons is a little different than when you sign in to post. But they see on the left-hand side, not always obvious, the sheets of paper, applications and related materials. The organization chart is ownership reports. The briefcase is EEO records. And that includes the audits and as well as annual EEO public file reports that you have to load. The teardrop there is a contour map. And I see I've been knocked out of the webinar. Are we still live?
Out too. I'm closed. I've been closed.
Should I go on, or are we
Yeah,
still
everyone can
live
still hear
with the
you.
audience? Okay, great. The next there with the sort of Medal of Honor is political files. Under that is, when you look at the binoculars, that's more files, including most notably the ongoing donor list and the quarterly issues programs lists. And the bottom one is a view of document uploads, so the public or FCC staff can quickly look to see not only what you've uploaded, but when you uploaded it. The next page is Oregon KOPB FM, showing you the gold standard, as far as I'm concerned, in donor lists, where information is compiled for this radio station from each of its program sources and regularly updated, showing what donors have supported programming. The next slide is WHYY-FM from Philadelphia, and there you see just an example of what the public would see when they look at issues and programs lists. They've chosen to organize here by year, which is a great idea to set up folders for each year, and the lists are compiled from the beginning of the current license term. That brings us to the next puzzler.
So, Kristen, I want to be sure that you can still hear my audio.
Yep, we can hear you both just fine.
Okay, we're getting all kinds of notices at our end of weird things happening, but that's fine.
And you're back on.
All right, thank you. Just so that you know, or in case you didn't know, on that last puzzler, you would want to have your annual EEO public file reports dating back to the last renewal, your donor lists for 2 years. You do not need a photo of your GM, and you do want to have your issues programs lists back to the beginning of the renewal term. So now, why do we care? Maybe we should have started with this slide. If you don't have the public file in good order and all the documents required to be uploaded at the required time, you could be in for FCC forfeitures, reporting conditions, and short-term renewal. What I really want to do is point your attention to this question at the bottom of the slide that's part of your renewal application. And in it, you are certifying that the licensee says that the documentation required by the FCC's rules to be in the public files have been placed in the station's public inspection file at the appropriate times. And if that's not perfect, you will need to check no and provide an exhibit. Now that the online public file, the FCC staff can see, in fact, they may even have a bot that will tell them that you didn't upload your quarterly issues programs report within 10 days of the close of the quarter, or you didn't upload your annual EEO public file report if you need to prepare one with 5 or more full-time employees by your license renewal anniversary filing date. So if you're late, that will be very obvious because the upload dates and times will be logged on the online public file. It's also visible to members of the public, so if anyone wants to cause trouble, they can do that. They're readily apparent. You can no longer hide. I do expect that the FCC staff will be checking them. I do know that some of the TV stations had transitioned before their renewal cycle was completed, towards the end of the TV renewal cycle last go-around, and the FCC staff was checking issues programs lists. So we want to make sure that your quarterly issues programs lists have all the required elements because the FCC will be looking at them, as will anyone trying to cause you trouble. And you do not want to lie on your renewal application because that will get you in more trouble than admitting it. Now, as far as forfeitures are concerned, if you don't have your quarterly issues programs lists, historically, the FCC has fined stations $10,000 or more for missing more than a year's worth of reports. And it seems like each renewal cycle, that amount goes up. If you're unable to reconstruct your issues programs list, let's just say that they went missing, then you might be facing a short-term renewal, and the FCC might renew you only for 4 years. They might put you on reporting conditions, which means you have to file with the FCC every year all of your issues programs lists. It's a lot of hassle. You don't want to go there. Let's try and do it right from the get-go, which is why this transition by the beginning of March is so critical, because you want to make sure that your public file is in good shape before you go live with it. And with that, I think we can ask, we might have time.
If there's any time, we lost a few minutes. If there's time, we could go to a few Q&A on the public file.
Here's a question. For the quarterly issues/program report, what do we do about syndicated shows?
The issues programs, for the issues programs report, you're required to ascertain by any means you want what are some of the issues and needs facing your community. And then you list the most significant programming that addresses those issues, whether that programming is national, regional, syndicated, or your own local programming. So for the issues programs list, there's no requirement that every program be there. If you have syndicated programming that's issues-oriented programming, chances are the syndicator is going to, on request, provide information to you about the programs. But if they don't, and you have other programming, local, national, other syndicators, whatever, that addresses issues and needs that you believe are significant in your community, you can list those other programs. There's not a requirement, and you can have all national programs if they address the issues in your community. You can have all local programs. You can have a mixture. Once you have some long-form programming, you can have also use breaking news that addresses issues, or PSAs that address issues. Not the Red Cross is holding a dance Friday night, but it's National such and such Disease Awareness Month, and it's a good time to get screened. That might respond to in the health category.
Will a joint licensee station have the same facility number?
No. Every facility would have its own FRN, but each facility will have its own facility. Each station has its own facility number.
How do we indicate we have fewer than 5 employees and therefore do not file an EEO report?
What I recommend is that you just upload a piece of paper saying that our employment unit has fewer than 5 full-time employees. Then it's obvious that you didn't ignore the category, it's just that it does not apply.
Okay, and time for one more question. What do we do if the FCC has not yet uploaded all of our documents?
There is a tech support link on the online public file. You should contact that. Where we've seen problems so far might be on the authorization link on the landing page. It might pull from a backup auxiliary antenna as opposed to your main license. If it has your main license, maybe it doesn't have your backup auxiliary antenna license, in which case you would need to upload it. So check the FCC uploaded things that are provided to make sure that it's the most recent and for the current station. The other problem I've seen is some stations don't have some licensees don't have all of their facilities associated with, it doesn't pull over in order to get that access code for each station, and that's been a problem area. And then that's really all I've run into that I can think of off the top of my head right now. But you would call the FCC staff and contact their helpline about getting that worked out. Or call your lawyer and they'll help you get it worked out with the FCC staff.
So if anyone has any more general questions, Larry and Melodie have provided their emails. And on behalf of everyone at PMBA, we'd like to give special thanks to Larry and Melodie for spending time with us this afternoon. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you at the next PMBA Toolkit.